All right, hello everybody. Welcome to episode 13 of Plays Well with Others, Lucky 13. As always, I'm your host, Andrew Moore, and I'm joined by my illustrious co-host, Jess Agnew. So if you've been with us the last couple of episodes, we've been talking about how to not only get stuff done, GSD, but also moving from a GSD mentality into one that's more growth-oriented. And we were thinking and discussing earlier that as you move from a GSD mentality to a growth or organized or growth supported mentality, you often start looking for recruiting, hiring, bringing more people onto the team to do more of whatever it is that you do. And especially in a post-COVID world or intra-COVID world, a lot of people are used to remote work, and a lot of companies aren't. So what we wanted to do is take two episodes, at least two, I think it's going to be two, but two episodes focused on the impacts of remote work in everyone's businesses. And so for this episode, we wanted to focus on how being able to work from home or work from anywhere impacts the worker, the person that's on the payroll. And for the next episode, we wanted to talk about what that means for the hiring managers, because they're largely related impacts, but they're very distinct in how we look at them and how we treat remote work. And so for most of you that have been in the professional world for, let's say, the last 5 years, the way that you go to work has vastly changed.
Yes.
And it probably happened overnight. It probably went from you went into the office on a Thursday and then your coffee's still sitting there 3 years later.
That was maybe almost exactly what happened.
Yep.
March 2020, the world changed.
It did. And I actually went back into the office. Actually, it was to get my stuff so I could move to a different company. But I went back into the office like 2 years later, and the amount of half-full coffee cups and lunches and things, it's not pretty.
It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where like people, you knew something happened because like people got up and left things behind. It was a little creepy there for a little while.
Yeah, I think there for a bit, the city of Pripyat was cleaner than in some of our offices.
I mean, it'll still probably kill you if you go there, but yeah.
Yep. Now, who out there has an office that's a part of an exclusion zone? Well, so back on the tracks.
Almost did for a while.
We sure did, and still do, I guess, in a lot of regards.
Yeah.
My commute's pretty rough. I have to walk all the way up the stairs to get to my office.
Mine's down the hall. It's exhausting.
I know. And the another sidebar, but I used to joke when I moved from the country back to the big city that everybody that lives in the city just gets all bent out of shape when they have to drive 10 minutes or 15 minutes down the road. I'm there 100%. I live in the country again, but I don't go anywhere. So, I gotta put on shoes. That's I don't know. I'll see you next week.
That's really funny. It is accurate, though. It is accurate. Our whole perception of reality has changed, and what is acceptable behavior versus not acceptable. It's very different.
So we kicked off this episode, and Jess and I have a shared Apple Notes file that we stream of consciousness dump things into that we may want to explore. And we started off this note that we believe that remote work has impacted diversity, equity, and inclusion, or has made those DEI initiatives, I don't know that I'm prepared to say more successful or different.
But it's changed them, for sure.
Yeah.
And I can speak to, at least from a female perspective, I can speak to that a little bit. I'm sure I know there are many perspectives that I'm not the best voice for, but at least from a female perspective, there are, I think, traditional gender roles that are still somewhat adhered to. And a lot of times women can, in their careers, suffer because they potentially take on more of the work when it comes to children, child rearing, sometimes even house, etc. I'm fortunately lucky to have a husband who does a significant amount, but even with the amount that I do, working from home has been so beneficial for me being able to balance those two things with a significantly less amount of stress. So I have a child who's sick at school. I can run and get them, bring them home. That's 15 minutes out of my day, get them settled, and get back to work almost immediately. And my daughter forgot her laptop the other day, so I grabbed it, ran it up to the school. I was back in 20 minutes because the school is 10 minutes from where I am. Those things are going to be naturally closer to your house than they are your work because that's how you're zoned to go to schools. So things just as small as that can be really impactful, not just on the time away from work, but the level of stress that you as a female or a male who has children and is doing these things as well, it can have a huge impact on the level of stress that balancing those two things have. And this is really not exclusive to females. This is really true for anyone with family. You know, Andrew has a similar story, I think, with his dog, having to kind of manage the care of somebody who's within your care. So I do think that that's been a really marvelous thing with remote work is the two portions, the two halves of my life, they aren't diametrically opposed anymore. I'm not suffering in one area to make one area work. I can much easier do both.
So you use the word balance a lot, and the term that we've all heard over and over and over again ad nauseum in some cases is work-life balance. And the one thing that I've noticed that was happening pre-COVID, and I'm going to use COVID as a watershed moment or a delineator, because there was work from home available to a lot of folks before COVID, but during COVID, it was like you didn't have a choice. But pre-COVID, we were starting to use a term, work-life integration. And regardless of how you feel about that term, the idea in its most benign sense was allow yourself to work and live without one overtaking the other, right? Mm-hmm. So if I need to go get my kid from school, or I need to go run an errand or go on a field trip or whatever, I've got my phone, I've got Teams, I can work if I need to. And there's likely some toxicity to that as well, because it's only 8:00. I just finished dinner, so let me sit down and write some emails so that I can be work-life integrated. I think it's a dangerous balance to strike, and we'll talk more about the impacts to the hiring manager in the next episode. But as a worker, as a colleague, for me, I prefer the term work-life balance more these days, because I, as well as my manager, but I primarily have to be really intentional about how I spend my time and how I protect my time. And we talked about this the last, half dozen episodes. It's important for me to know where I'm valuable in my job, and it's important for me to protect that time. So work-life balance, being able to say, I'm going to sit down at my desk at 8:00 and I'm going to do what's important for me. If I need to run an errand, if I need to do something for my family or something for whatever, I can do that, and I should do that, because that's what keeps me engaged. Nope, I don't know anybody that can sit down while something is going on with their family and focus and provide meaningful work. And it's not good for anybody. It's not good for the company. It's not good for you. And if you have that ability to just say, you know what, this isn't working, I got to go deal with this right now, you should do that. And you got to be able to do that. The other thing that I'll admit, being a little bit transparent on this, I've struggled with is this idea of community and your impact to community. So in the olden days, when you went into the office, the ancient history, when you went into an office, that was kind of your work community, right? You left, and for us, we went to Brentwood, went to Franklin, wherever in Tennessee. Those are kind of the tech hubs nowadays. But
Yeah.
you went in and you saw people, you met people that probably didn't live near you, maybe didn't live near you, and you built this professional community that you saw more or less every day, Monday to Friday. But now you're logging in, you're doing video calls, you're doing, text messaging, whatever, but you're still largely in your home community. And so the ability to provide impact, or for your company to provide impact, for you as an individual to provide impact, vastly different. And it's hard, especially for me being a techie person. Like, I finally met another tech executive in Dixon the other day, and it was like, wow, okay, there's more of us. Cool. I've got somebody to have lunch with now, right? So
Yeah.
I think as a worker, it's different, especially for those of us that, I got a dog, I don't have kids. So, I've got me, wife, and dog. I need more professional engagement, folks that, think like me or know the stuff that I know, or even just so I can sit down and say, how do we solve our community's problems with what it is we do?
Yeah. Well, and similarly, I actually joined a women in technology group because I missed kind of that camaraderie of having fellow professional women around me, people that I could, similarly to what you're talking about, bounce ideas off, mentor, mentee relationships, learning and growing and developing together. I really valued those relationships when I had them when I was in office. And so I wanted those relationships again. So I went a different avenue to achieve that than maybe what I would have traditionally done had I still been working out of an office space. But that doesn't mean they're not there for me. It's just a different way to build those relationships. So it not necessarily better or worse.
Yeah, and it's interesting how our perspective about building community or engaging in community has changed being remote. I'll shout out, for those of you that know him, Taylor Desson is I don't even want to call him a recruiter now, but he leads a practice at Vaco doing global solutions and global recruiting. But the dude started pretty much day one in creating content and doing live streams when COVID happened. And
nice.
He kind of, I don't know, I haven't gotten his perspective in a while, but I don't know if he predicted the market or predicted what was going to happen over COVID, or if it just happened to be happy accident. But he's gone down this path, always preaching the same message of engage and the community will happen. Like, it's 90% showing up. And
that is so true. It really is.
And for a lot of us that, live in cities that have more population, but more people that do the thing that you do, because again, we're not necessarily a technology podcast. It's just got a little bit of a bent because that happens to be what we do. But those cities that have more people in them often have meetups. They have more professional groups. They have more opportunities for you to engage.
Yeah.
Go do that, because you're not going to get the same amount of, we'll say, fellowship with people of your ilk in remote work only. It's important that you go engage with people. If you can muster it once a quarter, great. If you can do it once a year, great. Not all of us are the same extroverted, need to get out there and have meetups type people. I'm certainly not. But
I'm not either, but I do miss it occasionally, and it is valuable.
Right. It's important. And I coined the term, I'm going to say I coined it. I don't know if I didn't, somebody tell me. But what I described as the community trichotomy. So tri meaning three. So like generally being three buckets of where you can engage in community, being professional, being geographical where you live, or being like social networking. So you've got this online presence that you portray, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, yada yada yada. It's a version of yourself that often is reaching different people. For me on Facebook, it's people I went to high school with and college with.
Same.
But LinkedIn, if I looked at LinkedIn, it's an entirely different group of people. But both of those, by and large, are different than the people I live around, the community that I have geographically. And there's only a little bit of overlap in the professional world. So it's like this big Venn diagram. The key is you can't
just a bunch of circles then.
Right. It's a bunch of circles. There's some overlap. Maybe they don't all three overlap. I don't know. I tried to draw the picture, and I'll show you the doodle at some point, but it was harder to draw than I thought. Anyway, the point is you can't engage yourself 100% in all forms of community that you're involved in. You have to balance your capacity. And when we talk about working from home, it's given us some flexibility. It gave us some extra capacity that we can take from our professional environment, our professional community, and put into other areas, whether it be our social presence, social networking presence, or it be our local community presence. And what you were saying about, the women in tech meetups, I've seen so many of those crop up on LinkedIn, and even in the past year.
Yeah.
That it's been incredible. It's cool to watch people help people.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
I gotta say, I'm gonna convict myself here, but for people that are saying, I don't have community, professional community, whatever, where I live, go make it. Like,
yeah,
find one person.
There are probably other people saying the same thing.
There are probably other people. So I've been thinking about it for a while, and now that I'm talking about how important it is, I'm probably going to have to go do it. But sidebar, if you're in the Dixon, Middle West Tennessee area and want to get together for a beer, let me know. But I think that's the key. When we talk about impact of remote work on individuals, we've lost a lot of the community aspects that we had with work that were, I'll say, foisted upon us. Like, you don't get to pick who you work with by and large, but you get the results.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple tactical things that we can talk about to continue fostering and building community within your existing workplace, even remotely. So there's absolutely an extreme amount of value of building community locally and still having that human interaction. Face-to-face interaction is never going to be replaced by digital interaction. It's just not. However, I do think that it might be worth talking about how we can still build community internally at our organizations, even though we're remote. I mean, look at Andrew and I. Haven't seen each other in person. I don't even know when, but it honestly, it doesn't matter. We can still continue to have those same conversations, continue to support each other, continue to, professionally push each other, even virtually. There are people that I've worked with for years that I have never actually met in person, but I have a really close working relationship with them, a very successful working relationship with them. The way that you build those things is a little different than how you did when you were in person in an office. It's not grabbing lunch. It's not syncing up when you're getting coffee and just chatting. It's not running into each other in the elevator and chatting for a while. It looks a little different, and it's a little bit more intentional, I think. So we talked, we had an episode a while back about, what's the new phrase? What's your new elevator pitch? Yeah. What does that look like? And I think we joked around. We were like, oh, do you have 5 minutes at the end of a meeting? And that's the new pitch. But those two things are very similar, but one takes a slight different approach. So some tactical things that you can do to continue to build community would be kind of finding where you have those similarities with people in the meetings that you're having with them, right? Oh, you're talking about this, you're talking about that. Have those 5 minutes of conversation. Let those flow. Let those still be a natural conversation. Don't only do the meeting and then get off. It's okay to allow conversation, and it's okay to kind of bring up other things. There is a lot you can tactically do to continue to build that. And I do think it's worth continuing to push yourself to build that community internally in your office in whatever phrase that looks like, taking those intentional steps.
I think, too, one thing that we've learned and established is that there are agents of culture already within your team. There are people that, regardless of their title, they may not be people leaders, and they probably aren't, if we're honest. Culture has a different feel when your boss tells you to go make culture than if
forced fun,
mandatory fun. It was a good Weird Al tour, but so those agents of culture. We talked about it with Kelly Silva on episode 2.
We did, yeah.
Go back and listen to that. We don't have video for that one, unfortunately, so find it on.
We also expanded on it in episode 3. There's a lot there
we did.
In either of those episodes.
Episode 3 has video, but go back and listen to that. Anywhere you get podcasts, go back and check that out, because what we called that episode was Finding Joy at Work. And there's an approach that a lot of these culture agents take, and that's, we got to be here. So if we're going to be here, we might as well enjoy while we do it. And we had an impromptu tagline for this podcast, is how to build effective teams and actually enjoy doing it. That's a component. So if you're a worker or a person that isn't responsible for running a team, leading a team, you don't have to step away from engaging with the community or building the community, building the culture. You can always be that person that wants to have a conversation with you. And I'll take a slightly different approach to what Jess was describing. I found that really in the last 2 weeks, my calendar has been a lot lighter, and I've found time to engage with people one-on-one because, hey, we want to talk about progress on this particular project, or hey, let me help you with this particular component of architecture or this tech implementation. And while I've done that, I've gotten a lot more honest feedback. I've been able to give more honest feedback, and it's felt more natural than putting one-on-ones on the calendar. Do your one-on-ones. It's not an excuse. Do them. But
they're going to feel awkward sometimes. It doesn't matter.
And that's fine. But it's about the relationship. And when you build the relationships, whether you're in person or remote, you get more out of what it is you're doing. You enjoy it more. And when you have to have awkward conversations or crucial conversations, it's not as severe. It doesn't feel like I'm working. It feels like I'm just, we're trying to do a thing, and there's a bunch of us here trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. That's just talking about one-on-ones. Literally, those need to be prioritized. And I think that's part of what I mean by being intentional with making sure that the things that are important remain important. Because when you are in a digital environment, it's really easy to not prioritize things that don't seem as in your face and urgent, etc. But those one-on-ones with your colleagues, those your employees, those are incredibly important, especially to them. They may not seem as important to you because you're like, I know they're doing okay. I know they've got this. No, they want to be able to talk to you as their leader. They want the feedback. And what Andrew's talking about is incredibly relevant as well, because when you are separated from the face-to-face, maybe you don't take that time to just sit and coach and give direction. So things build up and build up and build up. And then all of a sudden you have an issue. And now it has to be addressed in a much more formal way than if you had just been able to coach small over time. The one-on-ones are an opportunity for you to, if you see something, put it on your calendar as a reminder for your one-on-one to say, hey, I saw this. Let's talk about how that went. Did you feel it went well? Well, these were some things I thought you might be able to use as a tool to do it better in the future. Talk through it. So then it's not this problem that's building and never addressed.
Well, since we're, on all accounts, since we're focusing on the worker, the employee, in this call. I wanted to address that a lot of times when I book one-on-ones as a manager, there's like nerves or questions or like, what is this? Because maybe they haven't done them before. The important aspect, the takeaway that we get from one-on-ones is not like status updates. There can be a component of that there, but mostly it's here. This is your time as an employee. It's your time to get feedback, to ask about how am I doing? I had this problem and this is how I addressed it. Would you agree with that approach? And really walking through just how are we working together as a team? Give your manager feedback. Hey, I saw that, this is an issue that you and I ran into and there was some miscommunication. How can I better communicate with you in the future? Things like that build the relationship, and it doesn't have to be awkward, doesn't have to be uncomfortable. Now, I will say I've got probably a binder's worth of content on one-on-ones for hiring managers because it's important that you set that standard and you set the expectation that we're going to do these, we're going to prioritize them. Most times, maybe 80% of the time, you just wind up talking about stuff and shooting the breeze, and that's not unvaluable. That's important relationship building and team building, even call it. But for that 10% or 20% where it isn't just talking about stuff, it's that opportunity to, one, build trust because one of you confided in the other something that, is maybe a little more sensitive, and you've reacted accordingly, right? So we're wrapping up this episode of...
Let me just say one... Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to kick it back to you, I swear. So Jess does have a parting thought, but so we're wrapping up this episode. Reminder, next episode, episode 14, we will talk more about the same topic of managing community, engaging with remote work, engaging with a largely remote environment as a hiring manager, which you'll want to come back for even if you're not a hiring manager, because it should give you some insight on how hiring managers are looking at remote work. It should help you with your application process. It should help you with your job search, with making your current job more effective, making it more enjoyable, all of those things. So hiring manager or not, come back for episode 14. It's going to be a good one. I'm going to hand it to Jess, and Jess is going to close our episode with the thought that she's got.
Well, it really is kind of, this two-parter is very important, because in this episode, we talked about being the individual employee. We talked about being the individual colleague and how you can engage and how you can, continue to engage outside of work so that you have human and, face-to-face interaction. But there's a lot there in terms of, is remote work, the way of the future? Are companies going to be pulling people back into the office? And I think as a remote work individual, what you can do to contribute and continue to keep remote work as a viable option is to continue to find ways to make sure that you're producing things in a way that there is a value statement, KPIs, metrics, having processes where you're inputting things into a system so you can track work and you can demonstrate your effectiveness. Those are things that I think is another tangible takeaway as an individual that you can do to help contribute to a better remote work environment. There doesn't need to be, there doesn't have to be a lot of micromanaging when you're in a remote work environment. Additionally, we'll talk next week about how you might be hurting your hiring chances if remote work isn't an option, because that is definitely something that people are looking for right now. And how can you build an environment where you can hire people remotely successfully, but also, set them up for success in the position. So definitely come back next week for that. Also, make sure you give us a comment. Let us know if we're doing well, what other things you want to see. We would love to hear from you. I'm very excited. Thank you guys so much for joining with us.
Thanks for listening.